Tensions have been rising on the Korean peninsula, with the north and south turning to psychological warfare tactics. And for the first time in years, Seoul has begun blaring anti-Pyongyang propaganda through loudspeakers on the border. It's in response to North Korea sending over hundreds of balloons filled with waste. In a further escalation this week, the South Korean military says its soldiers fired warning shots after North Korean troops briefly crossed the border.
South Korean soldiers stand guard, their attention focused firmly on the north. People here are on edge after Sunday's skirmish at the border, even if the military says this was not a serious attempt to enter the south.
Given that the North Korean military immediately moved north after our warning broadcasts and warning shots, we believe that they did not intend to invade.
But despite the reassuring words, relations between the two Koreas are at their lowest in years. Tensions have been ratcheting up in recent weeks after Pyongyang sent hundreds of rubbish-filled balloons across the border. Many of the balloons were said to be filled with excrement. That in turn led the South to restart broadcasting propaganda and K-pop across the border, reinstalling racks of speakers pointing towards the north. Now Seoul accuses Pyongyang of rebuilding its own loudspeakers near the demilitarized zone, speakers that had previously been removed. The Koreas have a long history of blasting each other with propaganda. The use of massive stacks of speakers goes back more than half a century. A deal saw both sides agree to stop using them in 2018. Their effectiveness has recently been questioned, and many see their reintroduction as largely symbolic. Balloons protesters in the south send to the north have proven to be much more effective. Their devices are often quite high-tech, and they can reach deep inside North Korean territory. These operations have sparked fury in Pyongyang. This week, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un issued a warning to the south. Kim Yo-jong said it would face new counteractions if it does not stop activists from sending their balloons and continues the loudspeaker broadcasts. The tit-for-tat is only deepening the divisions between Seoul and Pyongyang and remains just one of the seemingly countless obstacles on the road to peace for the Korean peninsula.
And joining us now from Seoul, I'm very pleased to welcome Jenny Town. She is a Korea analyst and director of the 38 North program with the Stimson Center think tank. Thank you for taking the time. I'd like to start, if you could, by putting this into context for us. How concerned are you by this rise in tensions between Seoul and Pyongyang?
It's very concerning. It comes at a time where there's very few channels of communication between the two Koreas. There's no active diplomacy going on. North Korea has said it's a separate country. It's not pursuing, peaceful unification anymore. And so this is really kind of the lowest point we've seen in inter-Korean relations in a very long time. While you do have North Korea doing, missile tests and deployments, you have South Korea doing a number of back-to-back exercises. And so there's a lot of signaling going back and forth that's very muscular, and that really has the potential for being misperceived and miscalculated in that process. And so it does create a very dangerous environment at the moment.
And is it just that signaling? I'm curious why we're seeing tensions ratcheting up now at this point after what has been decades of tension.
I think there have been, for instance, back-to-back military exercises going on in South Korea, between the South Korea and the U.S., as well as trilateral exercises, South Korea, U.S., and Japan. These are largely seen in the region by North Korea and China as excessive and debilitating. We've seen, North Korea has reacted in the past to, these NGOs sending balloons of propaganda into North Korea as well. And they've, threatened military actions against these in the past. Under the Moon Jae-in administration, he tried to stop these. by making it illegal to do so without government permission. And even that still got backlash from the North Koreans of if you were going to do it, then, you should have done it before it became an issue. So, I think there's a lot of frustration on both sides. And there's a lot of real posturing of trying to meet demonstrations of power with demonstrations of power to show that they won't be intimidated. And I think both sides are sort of caught up in this at the moment, and each time kind of escalating to respond that, to have these strong responses that they won't be intimidated to backing down.
And what do you make of these new tactics? Things like sending balloons full of trash and much worse across the border. Are these effective and contributing to this escalation?
Well, I think in some way the North Koreans meant this to be a strong response that didn't have that same kind of military component to it. In the past, they have actually threatened military actions and military movements. So this was one way to sort of match balloons for balloons on some level. And I think the U.S. response is, certainly in condemning these balloons coming over the border. But there's also been some posturing in terms of, U.S. B-1 bomber runs, which I think is a bit of an overreach for what actions took place. And it sort of does necessitate now the North Koreans to respond with something, a bigger military demonstration of power. And so I think there's a real need here for taking a step back. This is psychological warfare that's going on. It has happened in the past. I think we need to be careful not to overreact to all of these different signals that are coming across.
Yeah, I understand South Korean and U.S. officials held talks this week on how to better coordinate preparations for a possible war with North Korea. Can you tell us anything about those negotiations?
Well, I think this is, a common thread. There are some movements coming out of North Korea, some, major policy shifts that do create a much more tense situation and make the concept of conflict much more realistic. And so I think that there's a lot of need for greater consultation, greater assurances within the alliance of the cooperation if and when needed, as well as, how to handle all of the sort of new measures that are coming across. This isn't a necessarily new territory for the United States and South Korea. They've lived under this threat from North Korea for, decades now. But I do think there's, again, there is some question of, are we pushing the situation into greater danger by constantly needing to react to and demonstrate, this level of frustration and signaling for every little thing. Because I do think we need to be careful that we're not backing each other into decisions we don't want to make.
Well, thank you so much for joining us with that analysis. That is Jenny Town with the Stimson Center. We very much appreciate your time today.